The mistress shared her slave lover with her friend, until a letter made it to her husband. In the hush before dawn, when the plantation still breathed like a sleeping animal, secrets moved more freely than people ever could. Footsteps learned the paths between shadows. Glances carried meanings heavier than chains. In that world, a single letter, inked with careful hand and folded with trembling hope, could undo years of silence. This is a story of a mistress who mistook control for safety, of a bond she shared and shared again, and of how one small piece of paper found its way to a man who was never meant to read it. What followed changed every life it touched. Set in the American South of the 1800s, this tale unfolds on Briarwood Estate, where power ruled openly and love survived only in whispers. Enslaved lives and privileged ones crossed in quiet, dangerous ways. At the center stands a mistress with restless loneliness, a young enslaved man with a gift for healing, a curious friend drawn too close to forbidden warmth, and an overseer's son who saw more than he should. Their choices, made in candlelight and silence, would lead toward consequences none of them could outrun. If you enjoy deep, emotional historical stories like this, please like, subscribe, and support the channel for more unforgettable tales. Briarwood Estate stretched wide beneath the southern sun, its white columns gleaming like they had nothing to hide. Yet beneath that beauty lived 1,000 unspoken truths. Clara Whitcomb, the mistress of the house, ruled its halls with a composed smile and a carefully guarded heart. Her husband, Edwin Whitcomb, spent long months away on business, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and with temptations she never named aloud. Among the enslaved was Jonah Hale, a quiet young man known for his steady hands and his knowledge of herbs and black salve remedies passed down through whispered tradition. Pain found him before he found pain, and even those who claimed ownership of his life sought his healing. Thomas Reed, the overseer's son, noticed the way Clara lingered when Jonah worked nearby, how her voice softened in his presence. He also noticed Eleanor Mayfield, Clara's visiting friend, whose curiosity toward the enslaved quarters grew bolder with each passing evening. Nothing improper was spoken, nothing improper was seen, yet the air itself seemed to wait, heavy with a future already leaning toward disaster. The days at Briarwood Estate slipped into a rhythm that appeared ordinary to any passing eye. Morning bells rang. Labor began. Evening settled with cicada song and lamplight. Yet beneath that familiar cadence, something fragile and dangerous was forming, slowly, quietly, like a crack spreading through fine porcelain. Clara Whitcomb found herself watching the grounds more than she once had. From the upstairs veranda, she would stand with her hands folded, eyes drifting toward the slave quarters at the edge of the fields. She told herself she was only ensuring order, only fulfilling her duties as mistress. But her gaze always seemed to find the same figure. Jonah Hale moved through his work with a calm that unsettled people. He spoke little, but when he did, others listened. The enslaved trusted him because he healed them. The white household tolerated him because his remedies worked. His black salve, thick, dark, and smelling of pine resin and herbs, had saved more than one life when doctors refused to step foot among the quarters. That was how Clara had first spoken to him alone. She remembered the afternoon clearly. Eleanor Mayfield had arrived that morning, her carriage kicking dust onto the white stones as she stepped down, bright-eyed and restless. Eleanor was everything Clara was not: unmarried, curious, unafraid of boredom. By noon, Eleanor had complained of a headache brought on by travel and heat. A poultice would help, one of the housemaids had said quietly. Jonah makes them. Clara hesitated only a moment before ordering Jonah brought to the back parlor. He had entered with his head lowered, hands respectful at his sides. Clara had instructed the maid to leave them. The silence that followed was long, uncomfortable. "You're known for your remedies," Clara had said at last. "Yes, ma'am." His voice had been steady, neither submissive nor bold. He unsettled her. As Jonah worked, grinding herbs and warming the salve, Clara watched his hands. They were strong but careful, scarred but gentle. When Eleanor leaned back and closed her eyes as Jonah applied the salve to her temples, Clara felt something twist sharply in her chest. Eleanor noticed. Later that evening, As the two women sat in Clara's private sitting room, Eleanor studied her friend with a knowing smile. You watched him like he was something rare, Eleanor said lightly. Clara stiffened. Don't be ridiculous. Am I? Eleanor pressed. He is different. Clara said nothing. Silence, she had learned, was often safer than denial. From that day forward, Jonah was summoned more frequently to the house, always for some practical reason, always under the veil of necessity. A strained wrist, a fever, sleeplessness. Each visit brought Clara closer to the edge she pretended not to see. Thomas Reed watched it all with growing unease. As the overseer's son, Thomas had been raised between worlds. He ate at his father's table but worked alongside enslaved men. He believed himself fair-minded, but fairness had limits he rarely questioned, until now. He noticed how Clara's voice softened when Jonah was near, how Jonah's eyes lifted just a little higher when she spoke, how Eleanor lingered near doorways, listening. One evening, Thomas crossed paths with Jonah near the tool shed. You've been in the house a lot, Thomas said casually. Jonah met his gaze. I go where I'm told. That doesn't mean you don't see things, Thomas replied. Jonah's expression did not change. Seeing and speaking are not the same. The words stayed with Thomas long after Jonah walked away. The true shift came on a night when a storm rolled in unexpectedly, drenching the fields and trapping Eleanor at Briarwood longer than planned. Thunder rattled the windows. Candles flickered. The house seemed to shrink around its occupants. Clara could not sleep. She paced her room, listening to rain hammer against glass. When a sudden clap of thunder sent her heart racing, she made a decision she would later struggle to understand. She rang the bell. Send Jonah, she told the maid. I've taken ill. Jonah arrived minutes later, rain still clinging to his hair and shoulders. He stood at the threshold, uncertain. You may come in, Clara said. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to her temple. Jonah approached carefully, preparing his salve. You tremble, he said quietly. The storm unsettles me, Clara replied. As he applied the salve, his fingers brushed her skin. The touch was brief, accidental, and yet it seemed to echo. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clara did something she had never done before. Jonah, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, do you ever wish things were different? He froze. There are many ways things could be different, ma'am, he answered carefully. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time, Jonah did not lower his eyes. That night marked a line crossed, not in action, but in understanding. Eleanor noticed the change immediately. The next morning, she cornered Clara in the garden. You sent for him during the storm, Eleanor said. Yes? You didn't need to. Clara met her gaze. No. The truth hung between them. Eleanor surprised her by smiling. Then you're braver than I thought. What are you saying? Clara demanded. I'm saying, Eleanor replied softly, that you're not the only one who sees him. Days passed. Boundaries blurred further. Eleanor began requesting Jonah's presence openly, under Clara's watchful eye. At first, Clara felt reassured by that. Control, she told herself. Safety. If Eleanor was involved, nothing could be hidden. But desire is rarely content with supervision. One afternoon, Clara entered the side parlor unannounced and found Eleanor seated close to Jonah, laughing softly as he explained the herbs he carried. Their heads bent toward one another. Something inside Clara snapped, not in anger, but in realization. She had opened a door she could no longer close. That evening, Eleanor spoke plainly. You trust me, Eleanor said. Let me share what you've already taken. Clara's breath caught. You don't understand what you're asking. Oh, I do, Eleanor replied. And so do you. Clara said yes. She would later wonder if that was the moment fate truly turned against her. Thomas Reed, passing the house late that night, saw a lamp burning in the back wing long after it should have gone dark. He paused, uneasy, and listened. Low voices. Laugh! A door closing softly. Some truths, once seen, refused to be unseen. Far from the house, in the slave quarters, Jonah sat alone later that night, hands shaking for the first time in years. He knew the danger. He knew the cost. Yet he also knew that something had been set in motion, something larger than desire. And somewhere, unseen, paper waited, ink waited. A letter would be written, and it would not stay hidden forever. The letter began as a thought Clara Wickham tried to silence. For days after Eleanor's quiet proposal, Clara moved through Briarwood like a woman walking on glass. She still gave orders, still received visitors, still wore her practiced composure like a well-fitted gown. But inside, her thoughts churned, circling the same truths she refused to speak aloud. She had crossed from loneliness into recklessness. Eleanor, by contrast, seemed lighter, almost relieved. She treated the secret as something shared, something safe because it was no longer solitary. She laughed more freely, lingered longer, and spoke Jonah's name without lowering her voice. Jonah felt the shift keenly. What had once been quiet tension now felt like a tightening snare. Clara's glances carried possession. Eleanor's carried curiosity and hunger. Both were dangerous in different ways. He reminded himself daily of what he was and what he was not allowed to be. One evening, Jonah was summoned again, this time to Eleanor's guest room. Clara was present, seated near the window, her posture rigid, hands clasped. "You may speak freely," Clara said, though her tone suggested the opposite. Eleanor gestured for Jonah to sit. "Tell me about the South," she said. "You said it draws sickness out." Jonah explained patiently, but his attention was split, every word measured, every movement careful. He felt Clara watching him as though he were something she had claimed yet feared losing. When he finished, Eleanor leaned closer. "You're wasted out there," she said softly. "You could be so much more." Clara's chair scraped sharply against the floor. "That will be all," she said. Jonah left without protest. That night, Clara did not sleep. She rose before dawn, lit a candle, and took out her writing desk. The letter paper lay untouched, crisp and white, a stark contrast to the darkness in her mind. She did not intend to confess. At least, that is what she told herself. She wrote to her husband, Edwin, as she often did, of the estate, of Eleanor's visit, of minor repairs and weathered fences. Her hand moved steadily until it reached a place where honesty threatened to spill through the lines. She paused. Then, almost without realizing it, she wrote words that were never meant to leave her possession. She wrote of isolation, of temptation, of guilt wrapped so tightly it felt like devotion. She did not name Jonah. She did not name Eleanor. But she wrote enough. Too much. When she finished, her hands trembled. She folded the letter quickly, sealing it before fear could stop her. She told herself it was only to ease her conscience, that Edwin would never read between the lines. She placed the letter in the outgoing stack, and that was how fate took hold. Thomas Reed was the one who noticed. As part of his duties, he oversaw deliveries to the post rider. That morning, as he gathered the letters from the hall table, one envelope caught his attention, not because of its contents, but because of Clara's unsteady seal. It was unlike her. Thomas did not open it. He did not need to. He had seen enough, heard enough. The letter left Briarwood that afternoon, carried by a rider who had no idea what weight he bore. Meanwhile, tensions inside the house sharpened. Eleanor grew impatient. "You act as though you regret it," she accused Clara one evening. "I regret nothing," Clara replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "You regret sharing," Eleanor said. "That's different." Clara turned away. This was never meant to be. Indulged. "Then why did you allow it?" Eleanor pressed. "Because I was afraid to be alone," Clara thought, but did not say. Jonah, sensing the storm, attempted distance. He avoided the house when he could. He lingered among the quarters, tending quietly to the sick. But avoidance only sharpened Clara's resolve. She summoned him again, this time alone. "You've been distant," she said. "I've been careful," Jonah replied. "Careful for whom?" "For everyone," he answered. She stepped closer. "Do you think I don't know what's at stake?" "I think," Jonah said softly, "that you know and still want." The truth stung because it was accurate. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the hall. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I thought I might find you here," Eleanor said. The room felt suddenly too small. That night, the storm returned, worse than before. Wind howled through the trees. Rain battered the roof. Briarwood groaned as though protesting the secrets held within its walls. Jonah was summoned once more. This time, the summons came from Eleanor. Clara followed. What happened next was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and irreversible. A choice made without witnesses. A boundary crossed beyond retreat. Outside, Thomas Reed stood beneath the eaves, rain soaking into his clothes as he stared at the glowing window above. He turned away before he could see more. Days later, the letter arrived in Edwin Whitcomb's hands. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. He did not rage. He did not shout. He packed his things. Back at Briarwood, Clara felt it before she knew it. A tightening in her chest. A sense of being watched by something larger than guilt. When the carriage arrived unexpectedly at dusk, the sound of hooves on gravel echoed like a verdict. Edwin stepped down, calm and composed. "Clara," he said, as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Jonah watched from a distance, dread coiling in his stomach. The letter had spoken, and now consequences had come home. Edwin Whitcomb's return cast shadow longer than the house itself. Briarwood Estate did not change its shape when he arrived. Its columns still stood, the fields still breathed under dusk, but something invisible settled over it, heavy and unyielding. Servants moved more quietly. Conversations shortened. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Clara met her husband in the front parlor, her posture flawless, her smile practiced to perfection. "You returned sooner than expected," she said. Edwin removed his gloves slowly. "Business concluded earlier than planned." His eyes lingered on her face, not searching, not suspicious, but measuring. That unsettled her more than anger ever could. Eleanor watched from the doorway, her confidence faltering for the first time. That evening, Edwin insisted on a family supper. Candles flickered along the long dining table. Silverware gleamed. Plates remained half-touched. Conversation was polite. Too polite. Eleanor spoke of her travels. Edwin asked after mutual acquaintances. Clara answered questions about the estate with careful precision. No one mentioned Jonah, yet his presence haunted every pause. Thomas Reed stood near the wall, serving wine, observing quietly. He had never seen Edwin Whitcomb angry, but he had seen him decisive. After supper, Edwin dismissed the household. "Clara," he said, "walk with me." They strolled through the garden paths, moonlight washing the hedges pale. Crickets sang as though nothing in the world had changed. Edwin stopped near the old magnolia tree. "I received your letter," he said. Clara felt her breath catch. "You wrote honestly," he continued. "That is something I have always valued." She searched his face for signs of accusation. There were none. "You felt alone," Edwin said. "Tempted." "Yes," she whispered. "And yet," he added, turning to face her fully, "you did not write as an innocent woman burdened by thought. You wrote as one already entangled." The truth landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Clara lowered her eyes. "I never intended." "Intentions," Edwin said calmly, "are rarely what undo us." Inside the house, Eleanor paced her room. Confidence had abandoned her, replaced by a creeping fear she refused to name. She had believed herself protected by Clara's position, by secrecy, by shared guilt. But men like Edwin Whitcomb did not need proof. They needed certainty. Jonah, meanwhile, was summoned, not to the house, but to the overseer's office. Thomas waited there, jaw tight. "Mr. Whitcomb wishes to speak with you tomorrow," Thomas said quietly. Jonah nodded. He had expected this moment since the night of the storm. "Do you know why?" Thomas asked. Jonah met his gaze. "Yes." Thomas hesitated. "I never wished you harm." "I know," Jonah replied. "But wishing does not stop consequence." That night, Clara confronted Eleanor. "You should leave," Clara said. Eleanor scoffed weakly. "You don't mean that." "I do," Clara replied. before this becomes something worse. You think sending me away will undo what's been done? Eleanor demanded. You invited me into this. Clara's voice hardened. And now I am closing the door. Eleanor's expression shifted from indignation to fear. You won't abandon me, she said. Not after everything. Clara turned away. Pack your things. The following morning, Edwin called Jonah into the study. Jonah entered with his head high and his hands steady. Edwin studied him for a long moment before speaking. You are known for your healing, Edwin said. Yes, sir. You are also known, Edwin continued, for being observant. Jonah said nothing. Edwin folded his hands. I will not ask you to confess what I already understand. Jonah's breath slowed. Then why summon me? Because, Edwin replied, this house cannot continue as it has. Jonah waited. You will be sold, Edwin said calmly, to a distant estate. The word struck like a blade, not sharp, but final. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. When? Within the week. Outside the study, Clara listened from the corridor, her heart shattering with every word. She stepped forward instinctively, but stopped. This was the price. Later that day, Eleanor's carriage departed. She did not say goodbye. She did not look back. Clara watched from the upstairs window, tears blurring her vision. For the first time, she understood the difference between desire and destruction. Thomas sought Jonah out that evening. I'm sorry, Thomas said. I should have spoken sooner. Jonah smiled faintly. Speaking sooner would not have changed the ending. Where will they send you? Jonah shook his head. Far enough. The final confrontation came at dusk. Clara found Jonah near the edge of the fields, the sky painted in bruised purples and gold. I never meant for this, she said. I know, Jonah replied. I will speak to my husband, she insisted. I will beg. Jonah turned to her gently. Do not. Her tears fell freely now. I ruined your life. No, Jonah said softly. You revealed what already was. They stood there as the sun slipped below the horizon, knowing this was their last moment unguarded. That night, Edwin watched Clara from across their bedroom. You will remain my wife, he said. But some doors, once open, cannot be closed without cost. Clara nodded silently. In the quarters, Jonah packed what little he owned: herbs, a small tin of black salve, memories too heavy to carry. As dawn approached, the estate stirred. And though the worst had already happened, the true ending had not yet been written. The morning Jonah was taken from Briarwood dawned pale and quiet, as if the land itself wished to soften the blow. A thin fog lay across the fields, blurring edges, dulling sound. Hooves waited near the gate. Chains did not clatter. Orders were not shouted. Everything was done with a deliberate calm that made it harder to bear. Jonah stood beside the wagon with a small bundle at his feet. Inside it were the only things he claimed as his own: dried herbs wrapped in cloth, a tin of black salve, and a folded scrap of paper bearing his mother's handwriting. He did not look back at the quarters. He did not look toward the house. But Clara did. From the upstairs window, she watched him with a hollow ache she would never fully name. She had dressed carefully, as though appearance could atone for consequence. When she realized she could not remain hidden, she descended the stairs and stepped onto the veranda. Jonah felt her presence before he saw her. Their eyes met briefly. No words passed between them. None were needed. Edwin Whitcomb oversaw the departure himself. He spoke courteously to the trader, signed the necessary papers, and handed over payment without visible emotion. To any observer, it was merely business concluded. Thomas Reed stood nearby, his jaw clenched, hands curled into fists at his sides. He had argued, quietly, uselessly, but Edwin's decision had been immovable. As the wagon rolled forward, Clara took an unsteady step, then stopped. She understood now that this was the final cost of silence. Jonah did not turn around. The days that followed were quieter than before, but not calmer. Eleanor Mayfield wrote twice after leaving Briarwood. The first letter was angry. The second was pleading. Clara burned them both unread. Whatever had passed between them belonged to a self she no longer recognized. Life resumed its expected shape. Meals were taken. Guests arrived. Orders were given. Yet the house felt larger and emptier, as though something essential had been removed and replaced with polished absence. Edwin remained composed, but distant. "You will not be punished publicly," he told Clara one evening. "Reputation matters." She nodded. "And privately?" He met her gaze. "You will live with what you chose." She did. Weeks later, word reached Briarwood of Jonah's condition. He had been sold to a coastal estate, harsher in climate, stricter in discipline. The labor was heavy. The overseer there had little patience for quiet men with knowledge beyond their station. Yet Jonah endured. He healed where he could. He spoke little. He listened much. The black salve remained his small rebellion, used to ease pain where kindness was forbidden. One night, an older enslaved woman approached him with a fevered child. "Can you help?" she asked. Jonah knelt without hesitation. As he worked, he realized something important. Though taken from Briarwood, his purpose had not been stripped away. His body might be owned, but his skill, his care, remained his own. Back at Briarwood, Thomas Reed made a choice of his own. He requested transfer, away from his father's oversight, away from the house that reminded him daily of what he had failed to prevent. He left quietly, without ceremony. Before departing, he spoke once more with Clara. "You didn't ask for cruelty," Thomas said, "but you benefited from it." Clara did not argue. "I know," Thomas nodded. "Knowing is the beginning, not the end." Seasons turned. Clara's marriage settled into a colder, more formal arrangement. Edwin never spoke of Jonah again, never spoke of Eleanor. His silence was his judgment. Yet Clara changed. She began visiting the quarters, not as an authority, but as a listener. She approved small mercies. She turned her eyes away when rules demanded hardness. It was not redemption, but it was movement. One afternoon, months later, a letter arrived, not addressed to Clara, but meant for her eyes. It came from the coastal estate, carried by a trader who had heard whispers of Briarwood's past. Inside was a simple message, written in careful script. "I am alive. I heal. I remember who I am." No signature was needed. Clara pressed the letter to her chest and wept, not for what she had lost, but for what she had finally understood. That night, she wrote a letter of her own, not to Edwin, not to Eleanor, but to herself. She wrote of responsibility, of restraint, of the cost of believing power could shield desire from consequence. She sealed it and placed it in her desk. Some lessons, she knew now, were meant to be kept. Far away, under a different sky, Jonah stood at the edge of unfamiliar fields and felt something like peace settle within him. Not freedom, but direction. He had survived. And survival, in a world designed to deny it, was its own quiet victory. Years softened the sharpest edges of memory, but they did not erase them. Briarwood Estate aged the way all grand things eventually do, gracefully on the surface, unevenly beneath. The white columns lost some of their brightness. The gardens grew wilder at the edges. The house still stood tall, but it no longer pretended to be untouched by time. Clara Whitcomb walked its halls more slowly now. Her hair, once carefully arranged, showed threads of silver. Her posture remained dignified, but her eyes carried a depth they had not before. She had learned to see, not just what was allowed, but what was true. Edwin Whitcomb continued to manage his affairs with precision. He never remarried his wife in affection, only in name. Their union endured as a partnership of appearance, held together by mutual understanding and the weight of what could not be undone. They spoke kindly, rarely intimately. The scandal never reached the wider world. Reputation had been preserved, as Edwin intended. But within the walls of Briarwood, the cost had been paid in quieter currency, distance, restraint, and memory. Eleanor Mayfield married within a year. Her letters ceased entirely. Rumors drifted back occasionally, of a restless marriage, of frequent moves, of dissatisfaction that followed her like a shadow. Clara did not take comfort in it, but she understood it. Some people carried their choices with them forever. Thomas Reed, now a man seasoned by years away from Briarwood, returned once, only once. He came not as the overseer's son, but as a visitor. He stood at the edge of the fields, hands in his pockets, and breathed deeply. "Some places never let you forget," he said quietly. Clara nodded. Nor should they. Far from Briarwood, Jonah Hill's life unfolded in ways no one there could have predicted. The coastal estate had not broken him. Time, endurance, and his unshakable sense of purpose carried him forward. His knowledge of healing spread quietly, first among the enslaved, then whispered beyond. Pain recognized skill, regardless of boundary. When freedom came, slowly, unevenly, carried by forces larger than any single life, Jonah stepped into it with measured steps and steady breath. He did not look back in anger. He carried his past as one carries a scar, not as a wound, but as proof of survival. He built a modest life. He healed openly now. He taught others what he knew. The black salve became more than a remedy. It became a symbol of care passed hand to hand. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before sleep, he remembered Briarwood, not with longing, but with clarity. Power had once believed itself untouchable there. It had been wrong. Back at the estate, Clara received one final letter years later. It bore no return address. Inside were only a few lines. "I am well. I do good work. I am free." Clara smiled through tears. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the one she had written to herself long ago. Together, they formed a record, not of romance, but of reckoning. On her last walk through the gardens, Clara paused beneath the magnolia tree where truth had first been spoken aloud. The blossoms were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the air. She understood now what she had not then. Love without equity is not love. Desire without responsibility is not freedom. And silence, when chosen, is a form of decision. The estate would one day pass to other hands. The fields would be worked, then left fallow, then worked again. History would move forward, uneven and unresolved. But the story, this story, would remain. Not as a scandal, not as a confession, but as a reminder that even in places built on imbalance, truth has a way of finding light. And that sometimes, the smallest thing, a letter, a choice, a moment of courage, can change the shape of many lives forever.